I'm just going to take a moment, if I can, to join our online speaker, Mr. Golubieski, and I'm just going to ask the technical team to put me in touch. Hello, Mr. Golubieski, and welcome
Hello.
to the forum. Can you hear us? We can
I
hear
can
you
hear you, and
perfectly
I can
well.
hear myself too, I think.
Okay, do you have an echo on
Thank
your
you for
side?
having me. No, it's fine. It doesn't disturb me.
Okay, just allow me first to introduce you, and then you can deliver your statement, followed by some questions from myself, okay? So this is Maciek Golubieski, who is the head of cabinet of the EU Commissioner for Agriculture and Rural Development, Janusz Wojciechowski, and who is joining us online for this forum. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Philosophy, Politics and Economics from Washington and Lee University, and a Master of Arts degree in Political Science from the Johns Hopkins University. Prior to taking up the cabinet position here in Brussels, Mr. Golubieski served as the Consul General of the Republic of Poland in New York from 2017 until 2019. And I know that you're on a tight schedule and that you must leave at noon, so it makes sense for us to slot you in now, and then I'll go back to my panelists in a moment. So Maciej, if you would like to take the floor, a brief introduction on your part, followed by some questions, okay?
Sure, absolutely. No, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a very pertinent discussion, and I think the intervention of my predecessor, I think, laid the ground a little bit of my remarks. When we're talking about such an ambitious thing as food system transformation, obviously we need to ensure that the EU and the member states are working hand in hand. And this has really been ambition from the get-go. I know that there are some questions as to what the proper shape of an integrated food policy should be. But I think, as anything in the political process, always complicates, and we have the product that we do, and we need to defend it and work on it. So to get it implemented. So first of all, where we are, I mean, we have the farm to fork strategy, which is notwithstanding the questions that have been asked around, is kind of the model, the blueprint that we have at this point in time for that type of transformation. So here we go. Then obviously we have the common agricultural policy, which is the, let's say, agricultural part of where the transformation of the food system needs to go. And everybody knows, who's been following the of bringing about the new CAP, everybody knows where we met politically. So we met politically between the CAP and the farm to fork in a place where the CAP needs to contribute and be consistent with the farm to fork, and this is how we are working on it. And he has also been following the political debates and the political dialogues that hammered out the consensus. Also know that the member states' role in this whole new policy is such that it really transferred quite a bit of that responsibility for implementation to member states. So that was a bit of a political, that arose from a political dealings among major party groups. No, and we have the responsibility on member states to implement the CAP through the so-called national strategic plans that we're working on right now. This is their role. I think in terms of integrating member states and kind of EU perspectives through this, let's say, joint farm to fork / CAP legislation, I think we have a very good compromise, and I think we have to work with what we have. Now we have to understand that first of all, when we approve the national strategic plans, we need to take pains and ensure that indeed we have that connection between the kind of agri-relevant parts of the farm to fork and the new CAP as it applies to specific circumstances of member states. Because when you read the farm to fork, this was something that my commissioner and myself put a lot of effort into to ensure that there are certain specificities that are taken into account when it comes to, let's say, even some of the targets, even though, remember, the targets are political and as I said, contribution and consistency with is the motto, is the operative legal kind of sentence in the agreed CAP. But even if we stick to the farm to fork itself, outside of the CAP, we know that there is and there are certain qualifications as to some of the targets that they need to really take into account, the different starting points, the local circumstances. There will be monitoring as to the impact that those targets and their implementation in the upcoming legislation, that those impacts will need to be monitored for food security, bottom line, income of farmers, etc. So, and I also would like to include in that monitoring of the biodiversity strategy and what's in it. So I think this is the setup. This is what we're now working in when we evaluate the national CAP strategic plans, and we'll be sending out observation letters that will be made public by the end of March. So this is kind of where we are and how, in practice, the points of connection between member states and the EU are.
If
Now,
I may
I think,
interrupt you there,
yeah.
just for a moment, if I may interrupt you, Maciej, just to dig down a tiny bit on the farm to fork strategy. And I suppose overshadowing this whole forum, we have the crisis in the Ukraine. Can I ask you, is there pressure to ditch the farm to fork strategy? At the informal farm council, your commissioner suggested that if food security is in danger, then we need to have another look at the objectives of the farm to fork strategy and correct them. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the answer is in the farm to fork strategy itself. The farm to fork strategy says very clearly that it will be monitored for its effects on food income and security. So I think, notwithstanding what crisis, whether this is this one ongoing or any other, during COVID we had the same situation. We need to ensure that while we are moving forward with our policy objectives, our political objectives of the farm to fork, we also take into account certain short-term needs, short-term to medium-term needs, depending on how long this crisis, this horrible crisis, will continue, to meet the ongoing demand, let's say. And I think the war in Ukraine shows very clearly that when it comes to certain imports from Ukraine and Russia, we're going to be in a very tight spot on cereals, on some oils and feed, basically, where we are a recipient of the majority of maize, for example, when it comes, which comes from Ukraine. So we have to adopt in a crisis mode certain measures that will attack the problems as they appear. But I don't think anybody, internally thinks about ditching the farm to fork. This is a political strategy, was accepted politically, and I think it was written in such a way which allows for all the appropriate flexibilities and adjustments that are needed to ensure that it continues on, while we also take into account some short-term, very serious short-term needs. Okay. So we are working right now on the food communication, very well, by the end of this month, where we will lay out a little bit of how we see this.
Sure, and that's the food security communication that's tentatively scheduled for March 23rd, maybe delayed because this whole situation is evolving quite rapidly. I have one question for myself.
So far, it's been scheduled for 23rd, or are we trying to keep this to schedule?
Okay. Good to know, Maciej, good to know. You mentioned there the price shocks that we are experiencing in Europe as a result of the crisis in the Ukraine. What is the Commission planning to limit those price shocks, particularly in those kind of touch points you mentioned, wheat, fertilizers, that have a direct impact on farmers on the ground? What sort of contingency plans are in place, Maciej?
Well, I cannot really talk about concrete actions as we speak, because they're being prepared. I mean, the Commission is considering the use of a variety of tools. I mean, we have them, not necessarily touching on prices per se, but assistance of various sorts. I mean, we have discussions and considerations with regards to the use of the crisis reserve. We have discussions and considerations with regards to private storage schemes for certain most affected sectors like pig meat. We're talking about, and it was also mentioned during the informal council, about ensuring that we have a bit more productivity going on set-asides. So that's obviously something. There is a whole package in ECFIN as we speak right now in the council on the state aid side, where we hope that maybe there will be some a bit more specific elements for the farmers in terms of coping with some input costs, while the farmers are already part of it. When it comes to energy costs, they're covered as undertakers. So there's a variety of tools, both on the national and EU level, that could be potentially used and will be used as we roll them out in the near future to help them out with those extremes of especially gas and electricity prices, which influence inputs enormously.
Sure, and thank you for that, Maciej. And I suppose the energy discussion is for another day entirely. I'm just going to go to one question from the floor. My fellow Irishman, Niall Curley, who is with us here today, Biodiversity Policy Advisor with Copa Cogeca, he's asked a question on our screen here. Niall Curley, is this the time of crisis? Is it the time to continue to reduce the amount of land used for food and resource production when we are aiming to move towards food and energy sovereignty? Did you get that question, Maciej? Is now the time for set-aside? Is it the time for ecological focus areas when we need to focus on the whole issue of food security and food sovereignty? And Niall Curley actually mentions energy sovereignty as well. Could you perhaps respond to that, Maciej?
Sure. I mean, I think I touched a little bit on it. I mean, we have what? We have 2 million hectares of land that could potentially be set aside, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be mistaken by the number. But and the discussions are maybe about possibly growing some plant proteins on some of that set aside land. And this is a absolutely normal, justifiable discussion that is now taking place, and it was announced by the French presidency and by my commissioner. We'll see. But as I said, we need to keep two things straight, right? One is our general orientation. We have to remember about the climate change challenges. We need to keep our strategies and political targets ahead of us. But as I said, there might be some adjustments needed. Set aside is just one example. And yes, we're looking at all sorts of ways to ensure that there is production as well as resilience and sustainability for the long term.
And when would a decision be taken on that, Maciej?
Well, obviously not in a very far off future. Well, I won't be able to tell you how quickly, but I think we understand that we operate under a very tight schedule, so this won't be too long.
Okay. I might have one moment to take a question from the floor because Maciej's got a very tight schedule at noon. I've got a question over there. I can't see with the mask. Apologies. Looks like Ariel Brunner from BirdLife. Hello, Ariel.
It is me, indeed.
Hiding behind the mask. Ariel, please, the floor is yours.
Yes. So my question is there a debate about doing the one thing that could immediately release massive amount of food on the market, which is suspending all our biofuel subsidies? Because while we are discussing about destroying the last corners of nature to squeeze some extra production, assuming the soil is good enough, assuming there's water, assuming everything, we are still paying people to burn huge amount of foods. Wouldn't it be the ethical thing to do to, first of all, stop that madness? Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Would you like to respond to that, Maciej?
Well, yes, though there is well, first of all, not entirely, while it is an agricultural issue, obviously, the concern is that we have the Fit for 55, we have Renewable Energy Directive revisions, we have certain commitments, and I think we would like to go, as far as I remember, into limiting some of those uses for biofuels. But I won't be able to tell you if at this moment in time you're actually actively, and you're not the first one who's asking me this question, and we're actively now trying to see how we can address it. In fact, at noon, I'm discussing parts of it with some of the stakeholders, so it is a timely question. But at this moment, I won't be able to tell you specifics as to, but I think concern is very well taken. It's a very well taken concern, and I think there is a realization, with the crisis or not, that agricultural production is for food first and foremost, and I think we keep that squarely in mind when we discuss other uses.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Maciej Golubieski. And it's noon on the nose, so you're free to go. If you can join us if you wish, but I know you're on a tight schedule, so thank you very much for joining us on the forum. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Maciej Golubieski.
Thank you very much for having me. Good luck with the conference.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now for my speakers in the room. Mr. Achim Irimescu, if you'd like to join me on stage, Zaina Piazzi and Professor Peter Pickle. And we have now until around 12:30, 12:35 or thereabouts for our discussion. So first of all, gentlemen, please be seated, and I would like to introduce my three panelists, and then we'll continue with the panel discussion. Achim Irimescu, who is the Romanian spokesperson of the Special Committee for Agriculture. Achim previously served as his country's Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, having worked as State Secretary in the same department. Achim is certainly no stranger in Brussels circles and has had a long career as a diplomat in the town since 1998, successfully negotiating the agricultural and fisheries files for Romania's accession to the EU in 2007. Achim holds a PhD in agricultural economics from the Academy of Economic Sciences in Bucharest. Also joining us today is Zaina, who is an Austrian farmer and vice president of the Austrian Land- und Forstbetriebe. Zaina is part of the Forum's farmer network. You grew up on a family farm in Lower Austria, if I'm right, and following your graduation in agriculture, food and environmental policy analysis, you took over the family farm and you're now a second-generation organic farmer. During the takeover process of his farm, he was also elected vice president of the Association of Austrian Land and Forest Owners in 2018 and represents the agricultural interests of Austrian farmers. And last but by no means least, on my far right, I would like to welcome Professor Pickle, great name by the way, who is a John Deere Fellow and also manager in charge of external relations at John Deere, a leading producer, of course, of agricultural, forestry and construction machinery. And John Deere is also one of the forum's partners. At John Deere, Professor Pickle manages research and development of advanced technology, and he and his team lead all governmentally funded R&D activities in the EU zone and external technology relationships. In 2019, Peter became honorary professor at the University of Kaiserslautern. He studied mechanical engineering with a focus on production technology at the Technical University of Berlin, and you hold a PhD from the same campus, which focused on agricultural machinery. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to one and all of my panelists. So Achim, I'll start with you. As was the template that Stephen introduced in his panel, I would invite you to make an opening gambit, maybe picking up on some of the points that the head of cabinet, Maciej Golubieski, raised in terms of the strategic plans. And you attended yesterday, as I believe, a special committee on agriculture, where there was an overview, let's say, of all of the strategic plans. The Commission presented these. Perhaps you can give us a an insight into that meeting and also Romania's position in all of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rose, and thank you very much to organizers for inviting me. So definitely everybody will agree that European environmental policies are most welcome. Everybody would like to have green food, definitely. But we also, because there is a but, we also have to bear in mind, and war in Ukraine shows us very clear, we have to not forget agriculture should deliver sustainable food, but also food security. And in this regard, we will touch Farm to Fork and Green Deal objectives, which we can find a lot of solutions for sustainable agriculture, but definitely member states should look for the strategic plan how to tackle these issues. We had a lot of discussion in the Council and the Special Committee of Agriculture how to tackle the objective of the Farm to Fork. And if you look to the strategic plans, and the Commission just announced yesterday that by the end of this month we'll send letters to the member states with observations and comments, and before the summer strategic plan will be adopted for most of the member states, sending the strategic plan around 1st of January, so some member states delaying a little. So the idea was how to tackle in the strategic plans the main important objectives of Farm to Fork and biodiversity. And here, because what will follow, we know very well, we'll have to adopt also the legislation for implementation and also to take on board the objectives, because to be honestly clear, not everybody put certain percentage in the strategic plan. But for instance, I'll tell you what Romania did. Even not mentioning percentage of reduction of pesticides, okay, here also have to take into consideration the fact that already huge difference between member states. I look myself to the figures, and there are member states which higher use of pesticides than others. There are member states with 70% forest, so carbon footprint is lower than for other member states. So there is a difference, and here we have to take into consideration how much everybody should reduce. But coming back to the strategic plan, so member states did not mention percentage for reduction. Okay, we still not have a regulation on this. So it's optional for the time being, let's say. But every member state set eco schemes. We know that eco
all of the
schemes,
member states have introduced
Yeah.
eco schemes, because it is mandatory at member state level
Yes.
and then voluntary for farmers, correct?
to do more efforts for environment than the baseline. I mean, SMR and GAEC. Eco-conditionality, we have to go higher in order to do something for the environment in the context of Green Deal. So, for instance, Romania, instead of 25%, increased to almost 30% the budget from the direct payments for eco schemes. And also put in place two eco schemes in order also to touch the small farmers. Because if you look to Romania, we have 30% of the agricultural production coming from small farmers,
Sure.
which are green, because they don't have money to use pesticide, and they still use also old varieties
Okay,
of
so
crops,
that's the
which are more
smallholders.
resistant.
Yep.
So they are already clean. But we have to look also to the big farms, and they have the capacity to contribute, definitely, to the Green Deal. But we have to help farmers to understand how to do.
Right, and on that note, I'm going to pass the floor then. Thank you, Achim, for that introduction, because obviously we have to get to all three panelists. No, so farmer, from your perspective as a farmer, Zaina Piatti, you're an Austrian organic farmer, and Austria leads the way in terms of the organic sector. It's already above it's at 26%, right, of your agriculture is at 26-ish % of your agriculture is already organic. So please, give us an opening gambit in terms of how you see it from a farmer's perspective, this whole debate of the transformation of the food system.
Yeah, well, for me, it's obviously that we have environmental challenges as a society together, and in order to overcome those challenges, we need as many heads and hands in nature, working for nature, and obviously we as farmers live there, we are working there, and also we should therefore be considered. The big problem why farmers are not working or going green is because it just simply doesn't pay off. It's not working, and therefore we are not acting accordingly. So if you want to have a transition, if we want to have a Green Deal, if you want to have a farm to fork and biodiversity strategy, you need to pay us either through the market or through public payments, through the taxpayer. And the market at the moment is obviously, we have an increasing concentration of bargaining power at the supply side, but also at the retail side. Just for an example, we have in Austria, since 1995, an increase for prices of farm machinery by 65%. At the same time, we have an increase of prices for farm output by 30%. So, you calculate this,
and that's going to get worse, right, in time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only the trajectory is on the up, really, in terms of inputs, right?
It's just not paying. It's not working at the end, and so we have to redesign the supply chain. We have to strengthen the farmer's position, and therefore we will hopefully see an increase of prices. But the question remains: is society, are we ready for higher food prices? And then the next step we have to think about is, of course, payments for ecosystem services, public money. The Green Deal is very important for us farmers. We, in future, are dependent on biodiversity. We are dependent on a stable climate. But at the moment, I don't see thorough payment. And also, when we redirect 80% of the direct payments for environmental measures, it's not enough. There is not enough money in the whole budget for us to transform properly. And I have to say, it's a little bit naive, this whole debate. And on the same time, you have farm unions that are going on the street and say, like, let's postpone the Green Deal, let's postpone the farm to fork. But we need this biodiversity. The clock is ticking, we need this climate, the clock is ticking. And then from there we go to the cap and the measures around the cap, and I'm very concerned. At the beginning I thought, okay, flexibility, nice, very interesting. But now I see at the application of the strategic plans, we have redistributive payments, eco-schemes, we have GAICs, we have capping that is going in totally different directions. And we have a distortion at the market where neighboring farms, where they have a border in between, just compete on totally different levels.
So you're saying that this whole idea of the CAP strategic plans, that it's renationalised the policy across the European Union. That was the initial debate, which the Commission refuted at the time. But if you don't mind, I'm actually going to pass the floor now to your colleague, Professor Peter Pickle, and we'll return to you, Zaina, just to pick up on some of those points in a moment. But Peter, from John Deere's perspective, and you spoke last night at the Speaker's dinner, how John Deere, from an industry perspective, plays a role. You spoke last night about precision farming 4.0. Perhaps you can tell the forum, what role does John Deere, the likes of John Deere, agricultural machinery companies, play in this debate?
Okay, thank you for this question, and also for the nice introduction with a great name. Let me start with the definition. You mentioned the word agriculture 4.0. What is it? What is it in technology terms? I would define it with a vision. The vision is that we treat, and my vision comes from arable farming, that we treat each plant as an individual. So we want to supply each plant with what it needs exactly with regard to plant protection measures, with regard to fertilizers, and of course with regard to water. So we want to minimize inputs and to maximize outputs at the same time. This is the vision of Agriculture 4.0, and this, I think, we are in a transition process towards Agriculture 4.0, and we will, I don't know how long it will take, but one day perhaps this vision will come true. And the vision is about producing more with less, and by this increasing farmers' income. That is important. We want to close nutrient cycles, and of course we want to lay the fundament for traceability and trustworthy food production. And by the way, I think if we come close to the vision, we save or protect our biodiversity, and by this we also contribute to food security. This is, I think, from the view from the technologists.
And what about precision farming then, Peter? Could you perhaps maybe give us a word on that?
Yeah, precision farming is just a part of digital farming or agriculture 4.0. So we want, as I said, to control everything very, very precisely, highly autonomously, and or highly automated. So precision farming is just a puzzle piece in the digital transformation.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd invite you now, if you have any questions, and anyone online, if they'd like to participate. I don't see any in my screen in front of me. If there are any interested participants, yes, indeed. We have a gent here from the Danish Agriculture and Food Council, if I'm not mistaken. Right here, about third row back. Yeah, if you can get a mic there. Just one moment, we'll get a roving mic to you. And perhaps state your name and who the person or who the question is aimed at, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. Tobias Kreis with the Danish Agriculture and Food Council here in Brussels. A question for Mr. Iremescu. Zaina Piatus mentioned the word naive. We're talking about food systems transformation, and we're talking about a budget of the EU which is now about 19%, which is the CAP if one includes the Next Generation EU funds that are now in a discussion whether those are to be permanent or not. Is it still correct to talk about the CAP as the EU's main policy when budget-wise discussions of bigger magnitudes are taking place. Also now, investment discussions about joint mutual funds for defense and energy. Or do we rather have to look beyond the CAP for new sources for this green transformation, sources from the market when it comes to carbon farming, for instance, or sources from other, well, parts of the EU budget for some of the things we discussed today?
Okay, thank you for that question. Akim, would you like to take it?
Yes, of course. So the question is very good because, as the panel before mentioned, it's all about money, finally. Because we have CAP budget reduced a lot, but now we ask a lot more. The Commission says farmers have to deliver more with less, but it's not possible because if you look digital agriculture, without huge investments, you cannot meet the new high standards. And definitely, if you look all the targets, objectives of the farm to fork, without the contribution of the whole food chain, it's not possible, only for farmers to do everything. Because all the time, if we ask consumers, they will say, yes, we would like to have green food and everything okay, but my question is, are they ready to pay for it? Because here's the question. In Austria, we have a lot of organic products, but I participated in conferences, they said, look, the market is not demanding at the same level. So it's so complicated for the farmers to meet the requirements, smaller budget, definitely. So here, as you mentioned, carbon farming, okay, we have to set up the certifying system framework for this carbon farming, and there's still a lot of work to do. But private sector should contribute, definitely. We have to pay farmers in order to produce sustainable and food security, because European Commission says very clear, we are net exporters, so we contribute to the decreasing of the hunger all over the world. So it is very important. Now we had this debate in the informal council about the products no longer coming from Russia and Ukraine. And Commission say we have food here in Europe, but we have to look to the third countries, Northern America and Africa, and other states in the world who depends on our food. So it's so complicated to produce more, but with less money. So definitely we should look for the solution here. And a solution definitely will be, we'll see what will happen on the long term with the increase of the prices, but farmers are desperately fighting now. We have in Europe already, not only in Spain and Portugal, but also in Romania, drought. It's the third year we had COVID, and the farmers resilient, but it's on the margin. So he is very, very on the edge. It's very complicated for the farmers to meet all these high standards without support of the entire food chain.
Okay, thank you for that, Hakeem. Zaina, would you like to come in there? Just your point in the naivety of the debate. Perhaps you might just tease that out a little, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there were critical points made that, you know, when we redirect the CAP's funding, then we will go into the right direction and things will be good. But that's not the case. I mean, first of all, it's not enough money. And then second of all, what if, when we have enough money in the CAP, let's assume so, we have a problem with the intervention logic. For the agri-environmental measures, we only can pay opportunity costs. So since the markets are paying off miserably, we only also get miserable payment for our agri-environmental measures, because I only can pay that what is foregone on the market. So also this needs to be changed. And of course there are voices that say, hey, look, we now have the eco-schemes that allow a deviation from this logic. But when you talk with the ministries outside, the ministries say, we are afraid to go down this alley because we do not know what's the reaction of the Commission and how to compute it exactly, blah, blah, blah. So I think really also to change the way how we are paying farmers, I think this is essential.
And from your own family farm perspective, I introduced you as someone who's just taken over the family farm. As a young farmer, how are you changing the direction of that farm in Lower Austria? What's your vision for the future of that? Is it sustainable? Is it, you say, a return? Are you getting a premium in your investment? Are you getting a premium for your products? Obviously, Austria has quite a high organic sector. Do you have the demand from consumers, for example?
Yeah, so the first question, is it sustainable? That's very difficult to say, but I'm afraid so that I would have to say no. It's not sustainable because of many reasons. But for example, also we have a price premium in organic, which is, or has been before the crisis, the double of the conventional prices. But still, I'm forced to invest in bigger machineries, in bigger scales, new technology, and so forth and so forth. And in order to survive and somehow stay on the surface of the water. And therefore, I have to marginalize biodiversity. I have to marginalize soil quality, and that's mechanisms that hurt myself. I feel it and I see it, but I also want to survive at the end, right?
Sure.
So the future outlook for me and the strategy for me is, of course, to stay on the more sustainable side of farming, because that's where I expect to be a price premium as well in the future. But also my resources won't be deteriorating. And also to find some niches, like organic has been a niche, it's not anymore. I will search for future niches. But on the world market, no way I'm going to survive.
Okay. I'm going to just go to Peter just for one moment. Zaina picked it up, this idea of investment in machinery, and you spoke earlier, Peter, about precision farming. That, I would imagine, would require an amount of investment on the part of farmers. So is precision farming just going to be a niche for those that are large farmers, export-oriented, or is that something that's going to be accessible to, say, a smallholder in Romania or a small farmer in the west of Ireland? Peter?
Yeah, I believe, I agree with him. Farmers need payment, and farmers need access to cash in order to do the investments that are needed, because I believe that precision farming is one of the key elements to become a little bit more sustainable in farming. So EU governments, member states have to care for that all farmers get access to investment cash by setting up tools and programs like European Fund for Structural Investment. These are all the tools that governments have to support farmers, and this should be one of our key goals in our society, to enable farmers to invest in new technologies which are more sustainable than they have been in the past.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. I'm just going to go to my screen now, and I have two questions. A question from Alexa Mayabos. Would eco-credits, which would be awarded for biosystem protection, be a solution for the farm system? They could work in a similar way to the carbon credit system. I might put that to Akim and then to Zaina. Akim, what do you make of that? This idea of eco-credits working in the same way as a carbon credit system. Is that something that could potentially be implemented?
Yes, but the problem is, for the time being, we don't know how well will work the carbon credit system for...
That's work in progress, true.
Yes, because the work but could be a solution. Okay, we have to deliver a solution for our farmers and think about what the impact it will be, because all the time we ask the Commission impact assessment. We still have to
But I think you're sick of asking the Commission for impact assessments, and they're sort of saying that they're not forthcoming, you know? So on the Farm to Fork strategy, numerous lobby groups have asked for impact assessments, and nothing has really been produced, apart from impact assessments that have been conducted by the JRC and privately, maybe Wageningen University, etc. But do you think that's something, Alexa, that could work in practice?
Yes, definitely should be, because we have to look for the solution for the money for the farmers.
Okay.
Definitely.
How about you, Zaina Piatti? As a potential idea, would eco-credits, which would be awarded for biosystem protection, would that work in a similar way to a future carbon credit system? It's sort of looking ahead. Do you make anything of that, or can you contribute?
I don't know the system of eco-credits, but the first thing that comes up in my mind is a huge staple of paperwork.
Yes, sure. Bureaucracy, bureaucracy,
and-
as we do well here in the EU. Huh?
Already with organic certification, we quite suffer from that. But in theory, why not? I mean, but how do I measure it? How do I evaluate it? How much of an influence do I have at it? So for me, the question is a bit too theoretically.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for that. A question has come in from Florence Buchholzer for Peter Pickle. With the green and digital transitions, farmers risk being further squeezed between higher costs and limited capacity for getting higher prices and more stringent requirements from the powerful upstream and downstream sectors. So I'm not used to this now. Stephen is used to auto cue, etc., from his time in hardcore. So do you understand the question, Peter? It's this idea of green and digital transitions. It's basically the farmers are further squeezed, right? And that I suppose my question, that we're going back to my question about the investment that's required on the side of farmers. What do you say to that?
So, when we develop a technology, we do a very careful study about the value of the technology. So we always deeply analyze the customer value. So actually, and I think our competitors do the same. So we bring technologies into market from which we are convinced that they are giving the customer a value. Of course, we want to earn money. We want to sell the technology, that's our value, but we would not sell something that is of no value to the customer. So progress investments will always help to, at least let the income stay on the same level or increase it. So this is our goal, always, with all technologies.
Okay, any other questions from the audience before we... Oh, great, super. I have a question right up here in the front. Gentleman, third row back.
Thank you. Well, we heard the whole morning the hard facts of what the farmers have to do with the environmental challenges that are coming up and the situation they were. But everybody shied away from talking about what science has in the last 30 years brought to agriculture. We have now the tools to adapt the soil with the right microorganisms to create a more fertile soil. We know slightly the first steps, or what it really plant genetics is, and in the laboratories, since 20 years now, there are quite some very interesting plants, but nobody dares to take the decision because there seems to be an emotional point that nature, that is what is there, and that should be the best there is. No, nature is, and we analyze, science analyze what nature is, and then we decide what can be improved. And there is no slight argument till now that the propositions had any danger for the environment. Absolutely in the other direction. So it may be time to take it also again up like you did in the very early times that this FFA was working.
You're referring there to new genomic techniques and genetically modified crops. Am I right in saying that?
Well, just the molecular base of plant physiology.
Okay.
You know plant and all the microorganisms and the insect of nature. We know what it is for the non-living world, and it's now very recently that we start knowing it, just like in medicine, that we know how agriculture is functioning. Okay. In medicine, we feel it is needed, so we use it. But in agriculture, nobody seems to dare to talk talk about it.
Akim,
I
do you
think
want to take that?
WWF is changing a bit for forestry because they realize that if you want reforestation, that you will have to need trees that grow faster and that are better adapted to the soil and better in harmony with the microorganisms.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you for that statement. Perhaps Akim, maybe from a Romanian perspective, that's certainly one of the countries that grew GM crops back in the day. And as that gentleman said, it is quite an emotive debate, the whole area of genetically modified crops, etc. Perhaps you just have a word on that.
Yeah, definitely. Research has to help a lot the transformation. Without research and the support of the industry, in my opinion, farmers will never manage to get in time the transformation of agriculture into a more sustainable model. In Romania, we had before accession cultivation of soybean GM, glyphosate. And okay, farmers were very happy because the production was 4 tons per hectare, a very good yield and very good profit. But okay, joining EU, we had to drop it. So the idea is, and we know very well because US is continuing to use it, not only United States. And farmers here, not farmers, are requesting, for instance, for new genomic technique. But here we have the problem with European Court of Justice, which put in the same basket genomic techniques with GMO, which is different according to our researchers. So, in my opinion, as well, we have to take profit of new genomic techniques. Otherwise, we cannot profit of, as you mentioned, nature managed to develop during the years. When France invited us for informal council, we visited in Rai, an institute, a famous institute in France, and they show us for grapevine a new implementation of these techniques, and they managed to reduce to only one pesticide spreading for vine, which is fantastic, 90% reduction of pesticides. So we have to take profit of the research, definitely.
That was a vineyard, right, in the Strasbourg region where the informal took place even at the beginning of February. The lady at the back, you have the microphone, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Hélène Moreau from the Committee of the Regions, and I have a question for the panelists. How do you see the role of the regional authority in this transformation of the food system? Because in the title of this session, you only mentioned the role of the EU and the member states. I would like to stress that in many member states, there are regional managing authority which elaborate and implementing the CAP intervention. Mrs. Pons, in this introductory statements, mentioned that the problem is that there is no links between CAP and the farm-to-fork strategy. And I would like to remember the audience that the Committee of the Region is the first and the only EU institution which adopted in its resolution in 2018 a proposal to include the farm-to-fork targets as mandatory targets to be achieved in the CAP. So maybe it means that regions are ready to make that link between the CAP and the farm-to-fork strategy. Mrs. Pons already mentioned in this statement that there is a lot of local initiative to promote this food system transformation, but not well coordinated at EU level. And maybe I think that EU and member states could not decide to transform the food system, and maybe it should be a bottom-up process. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène Moreau from the Committee of the Regions. Does anyone want to respond to that? Achim, perhaps, the role of the Committee of the Regions in the whole decision-making process, as Hélène said, how do we get that, get the voices of the regions in this whole debate, in this whole transformation of the food systems? How do we get them on board? And as Hélène said, they played a huge part at the beginning of the process.
Yes, definitely. If we look to the new higher ambitions for environment, European Union is putting on the paper, a very important role is attributed to the local production because it's smaller carbon footprint and we can deliver a lot of better products which cannot reach the bigger market. So regional authorities have to play a very important role in our opinion. And here, of course, new CAP, they should be involved as much as possible. Because honestly, if you look to Romania, it's a big producer of sheep meat, mutton. But it's strange to bring thousands of kilometers sheep meat from New Zealand or Australia. So we have our production here, never reaching European Union, honestly. And Romania have 4 million of hectares of pastures. So they are organic. So the mutton, the sheep meat, it's fantastic, but cannot reach the EU market. So we have to better look how to promote the local production, definitely.
Okay, thank you for that, Akim. We're actually out of time now, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to thank my panelists, Ms. Geneviève Ponce, Mr. Maciek Golubieski, who joined us online, Akim Iremescu, Zaina Piazzi, and Professor Peter Pickle. Thank you all very much for this panel discussion.